The liberal international order, if we look at the history of it, it's about 200 years old. And after 200 years, almost everything gets a bit creaky and needs reform. But the post-liberal, the post-war order is now 70 years old. And we do see rising powers, and we were all expecting them to have a role. But what we missed was that the democracies would be where the crisis is. Freedom House just released a report. And we all are familiar with the new authoritarianism in Hungary, Poland, the Philippines, and Turkey, China, and Russia, but the US made the list. Now, I don't think many people would have guessed a few years ago that the US would be on this list. So globalization success has actually created this unanticipated blowback. And there was one other question that we were asked on the panel, so I'm going to try to answer that, or at least my views on that at this point. One of the questions we were asked is, has globalization success paradoxically led to convergence of values between the governments of East and West? So in Washington, D.C., I'm a neutral analyst. I'm supposed to, try to be a neutral observer and try to figure out what's going on. So I try not to take any position, just try to figure out where we are headed. But, there were panda huggers in Washington, D.C., there were panda sluggers in Washington, D.C., and we've seen an evolution that once China became a member of the international system, once they joined the WTO, they would become very much like the rest of the liberal democracies. But we haven't seen that happen, so this was an unanticipated consequence. But what has happened is that China has influenced the West more than the West has been able to influence China. For example, I can think of a recent Cambridge University Press, the acronym is CUP, one of the leading journals in the world. Well, in order to get into the Chinese market, they were asked to censor many of their articles, and they agreed to this. So when a well-known academic journal will do anything, really, even self-censor, to get into the Chinese market, we have to ask ourselves, do we really believe in the values that the West or the liberal democracies espouse? And I can think of another example. I don't want to just pick on Cambridge University Press, which actually reversed their decision after outrage around the world by academics. But another publisher, a German publisher, Springer, has also agreed to self-censor. So we really have to wonder, is it just the rise of another power, or is it the erosion of values within the system? So I knew I was going to be speaking towards the end, and I expected the other speakers to fill these questions, so I tried to come up with another angle. So I just proposed 3 scenarios, because it's so difficult. It's such an uncertain time that we live in. So the first is, perhaps I called scenario 1, a crisis of transition. So the US-led political foundation obviously is eroding. We have a Trumpism turning inward. They're not as big of a player. So what will this new configuration of global power, what will it look like, the new coalition of states? We had that incredible speech yesterday with Netanyahu saying that the Indian Prime Minister, it was the first time in 3,000 years he had visited Israel. So, I mean, we have this interesting growth of new governance institutions, coalitions of states. The second scenario is a deep crisis. I mean, is this really serious? We're seeing, even within the European Union, we've seen Brexit. We have a lot of fears about what's happening in Central and Eastern Europe with Poland and Hungary. We're also seeing internationally, the global order is giving way to various mixtures of nationalism, protectionism, spheres of influence, and regional great power projects. So how is this all going to look? And then we also have, Davos this year is coming up very quickly. And last year, Xi Jinping, it was the first time a Chinese leader spoke there. And he came across in this kind of Alice in Wonderland looking glass world as a protector of globalization. Well, if you talk to most, and he got a standing ovation for his speech, but if you really look at what's happening in China and all these companies who want to do business there, it's far more difficult to enter China now than in the past. Chinese investments have dramatically increased in Europe, and Europeans are finding it far more difficult to do business and invest in China. So this idea of Tiansha, all under heaven, this kind of old vassal states, everyone turns to China. And under Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, some call it OBOR, One Belt, One Road. Others call it One Belt, One Way. And another one is One Belt, One Trap. So we saw recently with Habontata, very important for India, in Sri Lanka, this port, they had so much debt. So in almost a repeat of what happened with Hong Kong, China said, don't worry about the debt, you just hand us sign over the port for 99 years. So this is right in India's strategic neighborhood. So we see a new kind of debt trap diplomacy that we hadn't anticipated before. And China, and most of the people I've spoken to, they all look at them with great awe. I mean, they're amazed by what they've been able to do in such a short period of time.